Matthew chapter number 5, we've been working our way through the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to continue that tonight. So if you would go down to verse 33 with me this evening, Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. You may be thinking, well, it's the service before Christmas. Aren't we having a Christmas message? That was Sunday morning. That's what you get, okay? I am not good with all those things sometimes, but I do want us to continue with this here tonight, understanding the law. Look at verse 33, if you will. Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. There was a law that they had there that to go through, and there were some loopholes within this law itself, and we're going to touch on those here momentarily. But so you understand, here's what the law is, and so Jesus once again lays out, this is what you're being taught. But look at verse 34. But I say unto you. So he's not changing the law. He's just giving more clarification to understand exactly what he was talking about when they gave the law to Moses way back in the Old Testament. Verse 34 there, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. And so as we're looking here, we found that as Christ has dealt with the first three, we've looked at the first few there, the question of murder, but it's more along the line of what is in your heart, that hatred in your heart towards somebody else. He said that's what needs to be dealt with. He dealt with the question of adultery, but he said, I'm not just dealing with the act of adultery, I'm talking about the heart, that if you even look on a lady to lust after her, you're guilty of adultery. He dealt with the question, we looked at the question of divorce last week, and it was that they were always looking for a way around the law and out of the law instead of asking the Lord, Lord, what would you have us to do? And so we dealt with that question last week as well. And so this week, here we are, we're looking here with what Jesus is giving here for them, and it deals with our words. Our words. The statement here, or the law that is given, says this, thou shalt not forswear thyself. We find this in Leviticus chapter 19 and verse number 12. Jesus is quoting that scripture from Leviticus. It also is given once again in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 13, as well as Deuteronomy chapter 23 and verse 23. I'm going to ask you to turn over to Deuteronomy, to that passage. Deuteronomy, again, as we mentioned last week, is the repeating of the law. So what is repeating what was given in in Leviticus. And so we find this here in Deuteronomy chapter 23 and verse 23. The Bible says, that which is gone out of thy lips, thou shalt keep and perform, even a freewill offering, according as thou hast vowed unto the Lord thy God, which thou hast promised with thy mouth. So here it is in chapter 23 of verse 23 of Deuteronomy. You have made a promise, in this particular case, a promise to God. That this is what I'm going to do. Here's an offering I'm going to give. And he says, you need to make sure that you pay up, if you will. You're a man or a lady of your word. In Deuteronomy 6:13, he simply says, thou shalt fear the Lord thy God and serve him, and shalt swear by his name. What does that mean there? Let me get some understanding of what's going on here. First off, Jesus uses the word forswear. What does that word forswear mean? Well, it means this here. It means to swear falsely. It means to swear falsely. In other words, you make a promise, but you don't keep your promise. We've got to be very, very careful when we are talking, and sometimes we get ourselves worked up and we will make promises that we have no intention of keeping. And so we've got to be very, very, very careful when it comes to this here. It also means this. It means to perjure oneself, or to swear a lie. To swear a lie. That you said, listen, if you do this, this, and this, then I will do this. Well, that person does this, this, and this, and then you don't come through and do this. Okay, that is a problem, and so we got to be careful with this here. And let me just insert this here as well, especially as parents. got to be very careful whenever you say something and you lay the law down for your child. When you say, you do this, then this is what's going to happen, whether good or bad, either direction. You understand that every time that you don't come through or do what you say that you're going to do, you know what you're telling them? I'm not serious. So the next time you say, hey, I told you, they're like, yeah, just like last time. And they're going to get into this cycle. And so it's important with this here. By the way, that works the same way when we're dealing with others in our life. Whenever we say, oh, yeah, don't worry, I'll be there. I'll be there to help you out. And then the day comes for whatever we were trying to get done. And somebody made a promise they're going to be there. And we're kind of waiting around for them to show up. And what do we find? Well, they don't show up, then we're kind of like stuck. The Bible talks about an unfaithful man is like a broken tooth and a foot out of joint. Yeah. You ever try to eat some food with a broken tooth? It is no fun. It is no value to you whatsoever. If you ever had something kind of go out, get dislocated on you, then you know it is no fun at all. It is a very painful thing, and you don't want to use it. It is of no good to you until it's put back in. So we need to be careful when it comes to this here. If we're going to be people of integrity, it has to, it absolutely must include our words. Our words have to mean something. Our words have to mean something, especially when folks know you're a Christian. I believe it's in the book of Psalms. I believe it's Psalm 15 that the Bible tells us that we're going to keep our word even to our own hurt. Yeah. Even if it means I've got to hurt myself, I'm going to have to take the bullet on this one here. But we're going to do it. Why? Because we want to preserve our name. The book of Proverbs, Solomon told his son this: a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. Yeah. You listen, once you have burned your name, once you have broken a promise, once you have ruined your testimony, it's not that you can never get it back, but it takes a long time to regain confidence. What is built in years can be ruined in just a matter of moments. And a lot of times it's because of our mouth. We got to be careful, and so think through what is going on here. In these oaths, they did not swear by the name of God. That's where Deuteronomy 6, verse 13, he says they're to swear by His name. They said, well, if we don't swear by God's name, then we don't consider those oaths binding. And so it wasn't a big deal to break those things. Okay, you say, well, where's that at? Notice what he says here in verse 34. He says, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne. So here's what they were saying. I can swear by heaven, but not by God's name, and I can get away with it. I don't have to keep. If I don't swear by God's name, then I don't have to keep my promise. He says, don't swear by heaven. That's God's throne. So when you swear by heaven, it's as good as saying, I'm swearing by God. He said, but you're using this here. The Pharisees had this system all set up here that where it just they were very much people of literal, a very literal examination or explanation of what the law said. If it wasn't, they would take the law and they would get it down to the very minutest. Just real strict in its interpretation. And if it did not fit inside that strict interpretation, they found a loophole out. You know, how many times have we heard somebody say this? Well, technically, yeah. Well, as soon as when a statement starts like that, I'm like, oh, brother, here we go. Yeah. Try to justify yourself is what you're trying to do. What you're telling me, what you're telling me is this here, is when you say, well, technically, what you're saying is, I'm not a person of my word. That's what's being said. And so Jesus says, don't say, I swore by heaven, not by God. And he said, no, heaven is God's throne. Well, I'll swear by the earth. And he says, no, it's His footstool. Yeah. That belongs to God. Don't swear by Jerusalem, because that's the city of the great king. That's God's city. So don't swear by that either. He says, don't even swear by your own head. He says, because look, you can't make one hair white or black. And I know some of you are out there thinking, yes, you can. Listen, if you're using that stuff, that doesn't, just because you're putting stuff over the top of your hair doesn't mean it's not really the color that it is underneath there. All right? I remember we had a fellow in our church back in Connecticut, and he was going through some things there. And I remember he had a knee replacement surgery. Man, all of a sudden he felt great. And man, he had just this gray hair just going through it. And one day, one church service, he showed up and it was jet black. And I mean, everybody just looked at him like this here. And I remember him walking in and said, "What's the matter?" Like, something's different about you. "Oh, no, everything's the same. Everything's the same." Listen, you can cover it up. You can put the Grecian formula on if you want to, but it's still gray underneath there, all right? And that's what he's saying is that you cannot change what the actual thing is. He said, so even your head, you are the creation of God. You can't even swear by your own self. That's what he's saying. He said, look, don't go running around here and looking for all these things here that is trying to give you an out so you don't have to keep your word. How many remember, was saying as kids, across my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. I remember hearing that thousands of times, but then somebody would do this here. They'd have their fingers crossed behind their back. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find a way to cross our fingers so we don't have to keep our word. And what is Jesus saying? He said, look, I know that's what they've been teaching you. I know they've said it's okay to do that. But I'm telling you, it's not. So what is he trying to get? He wants his disciples to quit sitting around and say, how can I get away with, what's the loophole here? He said, no. I want your heart. I want your heart to be for me, and to the point to where you're saying, I got to make sure that whatever I say, because it's for God's testimony, I've got to make sure I do what I say I'm going to do. Yeah. He said, I want your heart so that you will give me your heart and help to see what is going on with this here. And so that's where notice what he says here, verse 37. Let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay. I always think of a horse when I get to that verse. He says, yea, yea. What is that? Simple this here. Can you just simply say yes and people believe that you mean yes? Or can you say no and people actually believe you mean no? He said there should be the kind of person here that when you're asked to make a commitment, a contract doesn't have to be drawn up. And all the legal language has to be put in just so. And you're not have to go through the contract. How many of us get those, you get an update for your phone? And before you can get the update, you got to agree to the terms and conditions. How many of you read the terms and conditions? Raise your hand, Heather. The other day, she's like, should I get this update? I was like, I did. It's like, well, what does it say in there? I'm like, I don't know. I don't have 3 hours to sit down and read the fine print. I come back later on, like 30 minutes later, she's on page 4. She wants to see what's in there. Why? She doesn't want to be caught. She wants to know what she's agreeing to. What is the point here that we have to have these long contracts? And that's the only way somebody's going to trust us. That should not be the case. It should be real simple that if somebody comes in there let's say they go up to Rubel's Meat Market and Ethan's there waiting on them, and they say, this is what we're looking, what we need, and so could you take care of that for us? We need 10 pounds of whatever. And so when they just say, that's what we want. And so he's like, okay, we'll do that. All right, we'll just say it's my wife and I. We go up there. We need 10 pounds of whatever, and so he's going to make it all up for us there. And so we get up there, and he says, okay, I got it ready for you here. That's going to be $72.37 or whatever it is. We're like, oh well, we only need 5 pounds. Well, but you said 10. Well, no. We only need 5 pounds now. But you said no. Where's the contract? Do you have the ticket? Let me see what you wrote down. Yeah. No. See what he has is the confidence is this here is that when we return, he's a Christian. He's going to honor his word. even if I messed up. And that's what Jesus is saying. So they shouldn't say, okay, you've heard, all right, so I'm going to write this down. I've had, people do this here. Write it down. This is what you're saying, right? Yeah. Because they've been burned so many times that they got to make sure that everything's written down perfectly fine. Listen, there should be something with us where we simply say a yes or a no. That is all that is needed. We make a promise. We're going to keep our promises. That's the way we should be when it comes here. The original intent of these portions of the Torah that was given to us here, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself here. For a person to promise or solemnly swear to keep something that in their heart they plan to break is wrong. No matter how carefully they use their words. If you're trying to just get somebody to leave you alone, but you ever have no intent of keeping those words, you're a liar. This is who Jesus is talking about. Here he said, I want you to understand this here, that what you're doing is you're showing that something is wrong in your heart. Why is that? Who does he say in John chapter 8 and verse 44? He tells the Pharisees there, says, you are of your devil, or you are of your father, the devil. He is a liar from the beginning, and he is the father of lies. He goes through, and he just gives it to him hard in John 8:44. Why? Because this is the heart of a Pharisee. The heart of a Pharisee is to give himself an out so it doesn't have to hold to his words. Let just simply a yes or a no be sufficient. Yeah. The devil is known to be a liar. Jesus, on the other hand, is known as the truth. His word is truth, John 17:17. And so if we're going to name the name of Christ, well, it's important, it's imperative for us that a simple yes, a simple no. We don't have to give a long explanation. We don't have to give a bunch of caveats in there. No, if we say it, they can guarantee we're going to do what we say we're going to do. But to follow up with that, the next thing here, real quick, look here, because these two go hand in hand. Verse 38, you have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. How many have ever heard this here? We want it to be fair. Literally in the law, it says that if Brother Lucas was to walk outside here and run into somebody, say he runs into Brother Danny and running into him, he knocks his tooth out. You know what Brother Danny has every right to do? Come here. I want to take your tooth out and get a pair of pliers out and yank his tooth out. So there, we're even. That was the law. Literally, that's what the law said. If you knock a person's tooth out, then they can take your tooth. If you cause them to lose their sight in one of their eye, then you're allowed to go poke their eye out. What? That was the law. We're going to be even. Notice what he says here. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if any man will sue thee at the law, take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. And so we are familiar with several of these things here. And so what was the whole purpose? Well, the purpose was this. Why was this law given? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The idea was to control the angry desire of revenge. Control your angry, because we sometimes see this happen in our system of justice, where somebody has this is handed down to them. And they say, well, that should be harsher. They should pay more. They want it to be harder. We saw kind of in the play that the choir put on. It was kind of that thought was inside of there. He should pay more. But that's not what. So God wanted to control that, and so He wanted to give them this here. So this is how things are supposed to be done. Justice is different than revenge. Justice is careful to only deliver the punishment so as to be an appropriate check upon further attacks. Justice is not emotional. Justice is not reactive. Justice is not excessive. Revenge is. And so that's why the law is put in place. So we understand this is weird. Okay, but what he was doing was giving them some things here. Now, the whole idea or heart of this law was restraint. The spirit of the law was an encouragement to men not only to refrain from going too far, but also to hold back. It was to be an internal inhibition, not a to the letter exhibition. So if Brother Lucas knocks out Brother Danny's tooth, Brother Danny's like, the law says, give me that tooth. That's not the idea. Okay? The idea is that he's got to repay of equal value, if you will. And so he's trying to give some restraint to this. So the justice of the Pharisees was something to be insisted upon. That sounds a lot like our society, doesn't it? They believed that everyone should go as far as the law allowed all the time. Every time. Grace and mercy were never considered to be extended to someone who was guilty. I was thinking, Brother Chuck, about what you guys did up here, and Brother Matthew up here is saying, I don't understand. You could have done this, and you're right. You were within your rights to do this here. I want justice. I want justice. And there are those who everybody must pay what they deserve. No place for grace or mercy. The context is toward personal individual responsibility before God. And so what Jesus was trying to stop people from insisting another person be hurt even though it was legal. I have my rights. We are a society that demands rights in everything. And when it comes to grace and mercy, unfortunately, sometimes us Christians are not very good at extending it because we have our rights too. And so what is he saying? He says, you resist not evil. You resist not evil. What he's resisting your evil heart, if you will. Resisting the desire that I get what is mine. Smite your right cheek, he says, turn to them the other. To resist not evil means I do not defend myself when I am attacked. Yeah. That's what's being taught here. Okay, 7 times in the Psalms, David says that God is his defense. Would you call David a wimp? Do so at your own risk. But he did not go out and try to. There was a couple of opportunities where he had an opportunity to exact evil on somebody, and he would have been right. But he chose not to. His men did not understand that. By the way, though, whenever he stood up and he would not let his men exact revenge on some of the other men, and he said, that's not the way we're going to do it, they've already seen him do it, put it in practice. And so they watched David live it, and so they were able to submit to his authority then. Why? Because their leader had already exhibited that to them in dealing with Nabal and also dealing with Saul. They'd already seen him do it, so whenever he said, no, we're not going to do that to everybody else, they said, you're right, David, we've seen you do those things. David was always tried to, wasn't always successful, but he always tried to defer the defense of his reputation, position to God. That was his heart. That was what he wanted to do. Why? Because he wanted to honor God. And when we do not resist evil, instead rely on God to defend us when we are attacked, we're living by faith. We're saying God will take care of this. And it's important to remember that Jesus was teaching his disciples to act in such a manner that this was not for government. This was for a personal responsibility. Suit at the law. Take away thy coat. Let him have thy cloak. That's that inner coat as well as the outer coat. And by law, the inner coat could be taken away, but not the outer. The outer had to be returned by sundown if it was taken. And so he said if they ask for it, they'll just give it to them. Why? He wanted them to be willing to just give and go even further if the offended felt it was necessary. That goes totally diametrical to what we believe here in our country. What do I owe them? $12.37. Let me count my pennies out. I saw a man who was upset because of the fine he received, and so he came to the courthouse and he paid his fine in all pennies. It was, I forget, like $100 and some, but it was all in pennies. He came in and he threw it down there and said, there's your money. That's not the attitude a Christian is supposed to have. That's not what he said. I want us to have a heart here where we're willing to give and be willing to be, if you will, to be even taken advantage of, to protect the name of Christ. Compelled to go a mile, go 2. The law say that you were required to drop everything and go with the Roman soldier or official. They asked you, but you only had to travel a mile. Jesus wanted his disciples to go the extra mile. That's what it's talking about. You're willing to go the extra mile. It's not required. It's just something that you're willing to do to show kindness to somebody else. We often read these verses and we're like, well, who would turn their cheek and let them hit you on the other cheek? The idea is not that, they hit you on the right cheek and they say, oh, try it on this side. That's not what it means. The idea is that if they're not satisfied with the judgment handed down, you're willing to go above and beyond to quell the anger. That's what a Christian is supposed to do. I know it goes totally against everything that we've been taught, isn't it? But it's what he's asking us to do as Christians, as those who name the name of Christ. What is it that God wants from his children? First off, he wants integrity in our words. He wants us to be people of our word, so that when we say this is what I'm going to do, I will go and I will back it up and I will do it. Doesn't seem hard, does it? But it's lacking. It's lacking. It's really almost to an epidemic level in our society, where we try to parse our words and say, no, as a Christian, as somebody who represents me, that's not who I want you to be. He wants us to be gracious in our dealings with others around us. Just because the law says you deserve something doesn't mean you have to insist upon it. Just because it is fair doesn't mean you have to demand it. Right. Just remember this, if God were fair with us, amen, where will we all be? Right. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 7, Paul, as he's writing to Corinthians, asks this, why do ye not rather take wrong? Why do ye not rather suffer yourselves to be defrauded? There's something to be said for somebody who's willing to take the wrong, to take the hit, if you will, to smooth things out. It doesn't mean that we just roll over and let everybody run over us back and forth. That's not what it's talking about. But it is talking about being gracious. It is talking about, instead of fighting fire with fire, we instead give a gracious look. Who's it that said this here? I forget what it was, what the verse says, but trying to, I can't even think of what it is right now, so I'm not even trying to quote it there. But the idea of this is just that when we're trying to fight things the same way, instead of just giving grace to others, it really is a bad mark on the name of Christ. God is after our heart. What my heart needs is to let go of my flesh. And it needs to cling in full trust to God alone. Well, if I don't do it, God can't. Because that's what you're saying. Well, I mean, if I don't stand up for myself, and if I don't stand up for my rights, and if I don't say something, yeah, you're right. You're as good as a person who says that God's dead. Yeah. We're supposed to know God, and we're supposed to have it in just a trust in Him. Let me run back here to David, and I'll try to wrap up here. David's with his men. And they're in a place, a position there to see where Saul and his men are down in the valley there. And David and Abner comes down together. And they're going down in there. And as they're coming down, Abner tells David, David, now is your opportunity. Now is your opportunity. Well, I'll strike him once. He'll die, it'll be done, and you'll be king. No more running, no more of this here. You've been falsely accused. He's been out here trying to kill you. This is self-defense. Hey, we can justify everything that's going on here. And what was David's response? How can I raise my hand against the Lord's anointed? I'm going to trust God that He will put me in place at the right time, and He will remove Saul in His time. That's David as a young man. Fast forward about 40 years, and David has a rebellious son. His son has caused rebellion. Everybody is all up in an upheaval in Jerusalem, and David and those who are loyal to him find it necessary to get out of town. And as they're going along through town, or outside of town, they're walking along, there's a man, I believe this was Cushai, I remember correctly, but there's this man up there who's up there, and he's throwing rocks at David. Throwing rocks, and he's calling him every name in the book. He's cursing him and everything else. You killed Saul, and you got Saul's blood on your hands. David knew full well he had nothing to do with Saul's death. In fact, he kept his men back. But this guy's up here, and he is just, cursing and swearing. Have I ever mentioned to you how much I love Abner? It's Abner again who says, let me go up and let me strike him once, and I will take his head off.
That's right.
By the way, although Abner's actions was not what David wanted, I like his heart because nobody's going to mess with my king.
Yeah.
That was Abner's heart. And so I appreciate his heart. But David said, no. It might be that the Lord is doing this because I need to be reproved. Or it might be that God's going to look upon my affliction from this guy here, and God's going to give me mercy instead. And I don't want to turn back the mercy of God, so I'm going to trust God to take care of this guy. And he let him to keep throwing rocks and dirt and calling him every name. It's the King of Israel. What was David? I'm going to trust God. I'm going to trust God. When God restored him back to the throne, that very same man came groveling to David. I'm sorry, King, I don't know what got into me. I apologize for my words. And it's just simple as this here. Don't do it again. He could have exacted revenge, but what did David show instead? He was a reflection of his Father in heaven. I'll trust God to take care of this matter for me. My heart needs to let Him handle the injustices that come my way. I believe it's Romans chapter number 12, where Paul says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Let God take care of those things. One more place I want you to turn and we'll be done tonight. Matthew 16. Matthew 16. Look at verse 24 with me, if you will. Then said Jesus unto His disciples, if any man will come after me, let him, what's that next word? Let him deny himself. In other words, it means I have no rights. No rights. Let him deny himself, take up his cross. When they said that, he wasn't thinking this one here. Nice, smoothed out, a nice glossy finish. It might be a little heavy, but it's not going to hurt you too bad. No, when he said a cross, they had a picture of two pieces of wood that had just been chopped down out of the woods and may have just been maybe had some of the bark knocked off just to make sure there were some splinters coming out of it. And then for you to hang on that thing and rub yourself raw going up and down it as you pushed yourself up to get a breath and go back down. That, when they saw, by the way, also whenever he said to take up your cross, they knew this, there was no returning from a cross. Nobody came down from the cross. If you took up a cross, that meant you were done. You're finished. Deny yourself. Take up your cross and follow me. That is Christianity in a nutshell. What we found in Matthew chapter 5 was Pharisees always finding a way for self-preservation. And what God was wanting was somebody who was willing to give self-sacrifice. And it really comes down to those two thoughts. Self-preservation. Well, that's not what I said. No, that's not what that. No. You heard it wrong. No, that's not what I meant. Self-preservation. Or self-sacrifice. Willing to lay myself down and take the wrong and go on. Aren't you glad Jesus did that for us? When he was reviled, he reviled not again. When he was falsely accused, he said not a word. So he stood before Pilate, and Pilate said, "This is your accusations. What do you have to say for yourself?" Silence. Nothing. Don't you know I could take your life or I could release you? Don't you know? Why, Pilate only knew self-preservation. And Jesus simply said, if you knew who was standing before you, you'd be hands off. But he did not defend himself. Even while he was on the cross. If you come down, we'll believe you. He didn't come down. No, he didn't come down. 10,000 angels were kept all around. He could have called them to set him free, but he stayed on that cross for you and for me.
Amen. Yes.
Now it's our turn. Now it's our turn. In our words, in our actions. Holiday gatherings can sometimes bring out the worst in families. We need to be reminded of that even when we're with family. Let's be reminded. Father, help us tonight